On behalf of the entire family, we'd like to thank everyone for coming today. We're here to celebrate the wonderful, beautiful life of my grandma, Ann Goddard Charter. It was a life well lived, a life lived to the fullest. 3,000 years ago, a wise king named Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 1 and 2, he said, "A name is better than good oil, and the day of one's death than the day of one's being born. Better is it to go to the house of mourning than to go to the banquet house, because that is the end of all mankind, and the one alive should take it to heart." So it's an interesting thing what Solomon said, that the day of one's death is better than the day of one's being born. And when you really think about that, that's true. Because when you look at someone who lived a long and fulfilling life, like Grandma did, 96 full years, she made a reputation for herself. She made a name among friends, among family, and most importantly, with God. Grandma lived to be 96 years old. The Bible says in a prayer that Moses wrote, "In themselves the days of our years are 70 years, and if because of special mightiness, they're 80 years." Well, Grandma had that special mightiness, and I think most people that knew her knew how strong of a person she was. Some would say mightiness, others would say maybe orneriness. But whatever it was, it gave her an inner strength that kept her going for that long a period of time. Grandma used to say to us that she'd stick around as long as she was needed. And I think she thought that she fulfilled what she needed to do in life. And she taught all of us little life lessons that will stick with us for the rest of our lives. She was a dynamic person, and she lived a dynamic life. A life full of purpose, a life full of meaning, and she made a strong impact on everybody that she met. To give us some perspective of her personality and her strength of character, I'm going to relate a little story that happened in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. During that time, my grandpa was a game warden, and he came home one day with a little baby badger. And so they raised that little baby badger, and he grew up, and he actually thought he was more like a dog than a badger. Until one day, instinct kicked in, and he heard the chickens cry down the road, and he trotted his little legs down the road, and he made his way to the chicken pen, and he started digging, and lo and behold, along comes a traveling salesman, and he sees this badger digging a hole trying to get to the chickens, and he knows how fierce and ferocious badgers are, so he wasn't going to mess with it. So he went down the road to my grandma's place, and he asked her for a shotgun. And he says, there's a vicious badger that's trying to get in the chicken pen. My grandma goes, I'll take care of it. So she's mad, and she has her kids in hand, and she goes down to that chicken pen. She sees that dang old badger digging a hole, and she reaches in with her hands and pulls him out, and he's snarling, and Grandma's snarling. They're looking at each other, and the salesman is about white as a sheet. And he can't believe this. What woman could be strong enough, fierce enough to look at the face of a badger, reach down the hole and take him? So that story spread throughout the town that day. Never had about the woman who had captured badgers, the toughest woman that man had ever met. There's an interesting quote of the historian H.G. Wells. He said that a greatness of a person is measured by what he leaves to grow, and whether he started others to think along fresh lines with a vigor that persisted after him. Well, as we can see, we have a large group of people that were affected by Grandma during her life and will continue to be affected by those little seeds that she planted in people, little ideas that she planted that will continue to grow and to prosper long after she's gone. Grandma was born in 1913. She was born in St. Louis, Missouri. And as she put it, it was a storybook childhood. She grew up in a 3-story mansion. She had the amenities of high society. She was a debutante, and she was launched off and expected by her parents to have the same life that they had, to grow and to raise children in high society the way that she had grown up. But it's interesting what Grandma said. She said, in spite of enjoying all my growing up years, I was beginning to sense the difference between the haves and the have-nots. I felt at ease when I considered what seemed a highly superficial social life. And I think most people knew about Grandma that she was always concerned about the little guy. She had a strong sense of inner justice and about right and wrong. And there's always been remnants of that past, though, that would creep into her life, even though she lived here out west. She was always a classy person. She was a lady all the way to the end. Although she lived on a ranch, she enjoyed, at times, on special occasions, she broke out her Christian Dior dress. And I always remember growing up that she always had her hair done just perfectly. It was always up. And actually, as a kid, I never knew that she had long hair. I thought she just woke up like that. And so I was surprised when I finally did see her come out and she had her hair down. But she was always classy. She was a lady. She was sophisticated. Grandma found liberation from that high society life through education. And Grandma always emphasized education to everyone. And education through the typical means or also through life experience. That was important to her. She attended French school in Switzerland, where, as she put, she learned to ski and to speak bad French. In fact, during the last year or so, she started to remember some of her French, and she started to say, like, the Lord's Prayer in Psalms 23 in French, or at least some language that sounded very similar to French. And I remember growing up, when I was learning Spanish, my grandma would stay up with me, and we'd practice my Spanish vocabulary. And I'm pretty sure that I learned a lot of my Spanish with a French accent. But that was okay, because she was always there trying to help somebody out, and she helped me out that way. She attended Wells College in upstate New York. And as far as I can see, it was complete nose to the grindstone for Grandma when she got into Wells. She had this quote from her book. She says, "In college, no one had cars, so it was important to know men who did." Which wasn't easy, because it was not until our senior year that Ithaca men were allowed on campus on Sundays. Because of Prohibition, it was a daring decision fraught with imagined dangers when a speakeasy in Syracuse was the destination for a date. Dartmouth house parties were known for serving dragon's blood, a grim concoction that was rumored to have killed numerous imbibers. We always felt heroic when we returned safely. So I'm pretty sure she was nose to the grindstone when she was there. In 2002, Grandma returned to Wells University, where she received a very prestigious award. It was the Wells College Alumni Award for her efforts in promoting legal measures to control open-pit coal mining. And I think that was a major highlight in her life, to be able to go back and to receive that prestigious award. She continued her globetrotting. In her senior year, she was an exchange student in the University of Frankfurt in Germany. There she took skiing trips, and she went to the Bavarian Alps, and they even skied past the retreat of Adolf Hitler. During that time, when she was traveling throughout Europe, she stayed at youth hostels, places where students could live for cheap for a short period of time. So when she returned to the United States, she got involved in developing the youth hostel system here in the United States. So she made it her mission to travel down the East Coast, trying to develop this hostel system. She showed movies, she distributed literature, she talked about the purpose of hosteling, and she also joined up new members. And so she continued that work throughout Pennsylvania, in the Ozark Trail. But during that time, she was learning valuable life experience, things that she would use later, like how to network and how to market things things that she would use when she later on got involved in the strip mining battles. But she always knew there was more than that she wanted in life. She dreamed of living in the country, maybe living on a farm or living on a ranch. So she enrolled in an agricultural course at the University of Missouri. And it was here that her life changed forever. She became an expert hog caller. And she became the hog queen. No, that's not really what changed her life. It was actually when she was offered a summer job in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So she traveled out west to live her dream, a dream that was far different from what she knew in St. Louis. And I'd like to read a little excerpt from her book about coming out west. She said, "For a long time I had been consumed with the desire to go to Wyoming, lured by the romance of the West and macho cowboys. Having cornered Roy, I volunteered to run his kitchen for him, and Frances said she would manage the cabins. Roy was pleased and commented, 'Hired for a free summer, and I'll even throw in a cowboy, Goddard Charter.' His family owns one of the finest ranches in the valley." So, of course, that romance developed, and Grandma says there was a strong bond drawing us together. But Boyd was full of doubts. What did he have to offer me? His only possessions were his horses and cowboy gear, his future uncertain, as the ranch would probably be sold. I implied that finding him was enough, and that I liked what I found. I was willing to take the risk to go wherever he was led to go. And that was a quality that really made Grandma fantastic, was her loyalty and her faithfulness. She says, although we were galaxies apart in our background and upbringing, we sensed a common bond. We could trust each other. I was 29, he was 34. We had both done some considerable living and were anxious to find a life mate and settle down. It wasn't exactly a proposal. It was more like a mutual decision to get married. Not a wildly romantic love affair, but a feeling that destiny had brought us together, that we were meant for each other, and that we could meet whatever lay ahead. That was kind of prophecy for Grandma, because they did. They met whatever challenge came ahead together as a team, and she always demonstrated that faithfulness and loyalty. There was a time when Grandpa went to war for 4 years, and Grandma asked him, why did you not wait to get drafted? You might have got a deferment because of the ranch. And that's when Grandpa made that very famous line that Grandma's book is based upon, when he said, I don't go for deferments, and of course I joined the Navy, because cowboys don't walk. So after 4 years in the war, Grandpa came back, and it was at that time they began their epic journey and that life-changing decision to go out to Montana to buy a ranch and become Montana ranchers. So that was a long way from the privileged life in St. Louis, but it was her tenacity that really showed through, and her stick-to-itiveness to stick with their decision and to make it work. She always seemed to be able to do that, to make the best out of whatever life dealt her. And through good times and difficult times, she rode alongside her cowboy, towing their 4 little kids behind them. Although difficult, Grandma loved her life as a ranch wife, and she always tried to follow the advice of her mother, which was to always try to find humor in everything. They didn't live in a mansion, they didn't have luxuries, but they did have a roof over their head, and they had God's green earth around them. Sometimes it was green. Sometimes it was dusty, but they had the ranch. So it was the small pleasures at times that she learned to appreciate that made ranch life worth living. And there's a song that Grandma really, really loved that described how she felt about ranch life and finding the little points of life in difficult situations. And now we'd like to invite up John Smiley, and he's going to perform Night Rider Lament.
I know a lot of you know this song, so if you're So moved. Join in. One night while I was riding graveyard shift, midnight till dawn, the moon was as bright as a reading light for a letter from an old friend back home. He said, now why do you ride for your money? Why do you roll for short pay? You ain't getting nowhere and you're losing your share. You must have gone crazy out there. He wrote last night a run on to Jenny. She's married and has a good life. You sure miss the track when you never come back. She's the perfect professional's wife. She asked me, why does he ride for his money? Why does he roll for short pay? He ain't getting nowhere and he's losing his share. He must have gone crazy out there. But then they've never seen the northern lights, never seen the hawk on the wing, never seen the spring hit the great divide. They never heard old Camp Cookies sing. Read up the last of my letter, tore off the stamp for Black Jim. Billy rode up to relieve me. He looked at my letter and he grinned. He said, now why do they ride for their money? Why do they roll for short pay? They ain't getting nowhere, they're losing their share. They must have gone crazy back there. 'Cause they've never seen the northern lights, never seen a hawk on the wing, never seen the spring hit the great divide. They never heard old Camp Cookie sing. Yodelay-o, yodelay-o, yodelay-dee-dee, yodelay-dee-dee, yodelay-dee, yodelay-yodelo, yodelay-dee-dee, yodelay-dee-dee, yodelay-dee, ah-dee-o-lay, yodelay, yodelay, ooh.
Thank you very much, John. Grandma found her strength also in another way. Ranching wasn't easy, and it came with difficult periods. But the saying was very true for Grandma, that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I'd like to read an excerpt that she wrote in her book when they were going through kind of a difficult phase. She says, as we were crossing the ranch in the Jeep one day, I started to light one cigarette from the butt of the other one I'd been smoking. I couldn't bring it to my mouth. I put it back in my pack and never smoked another cigarette. Never needed one. Never wanted to. My dependence on cigarettes was gone. My dependence on God began. From that moment, came the realization that God was real, that he cared for me, and that I could turn to him in my need. This didn't solve our problems, but it enabled me to cope with them. So God became a very large part of Grandma's life. She found God in many different things, from creation to eventually she joined the Grace Methodist Church here in Billings, where she appreciated for the first time a group of women that she had a common bond with. Until then, she was mostly in a man's world, and she very much integrated herself into the women's society and eventually became the president. And she still maintained those close friendships with the women of Grace all the way until the end. Eventually, Grandma and Grandpa purchased the Bull Mountain Ranch, not knowing that this would open up another exciting chapter in their lives. They spent most of their time there, especially after the kids left. And there was always a very special spot on the ranch that Grandma talked about that she really loved. It was called the 40. And if you've ever been out there, you know what it is. It's a great big cliff face. It's beautiful. And from on top of the cliff, you can see very far into the valley. You can see the beautiful trees. You can see their land. She loved that place. She sometimes talked about she'd love to have a cabin there. Or she used to just take walks and kind of observe nature. She'd stop and pray there. And there's a beautiful black vein of coal that sticks out right at the bottom of the cliff. And it was that beautiful black vein that would stir up the controversy, that would threaten what they had worked so hard to try to gain in their lives. Soon the powerful coal companies, as most people know the story, came knocking, and they wanted a piece of that, and they wanted to get it no matter what it cost. I think I understand more Grandma's battle and why they fought so hard to preserve it after I knew what they went through to get their land in the first place. Their entire life savings, their entire life was wrapped up into what they were doing. And Grandma was a trailblazer, of course, and she became one of the major players in the fight against strip mining and environmental destruction. Grandma was a uniter, and she worked her magic and helped to form the Bull Mountain Landowners Association and joined with her uniting force, and those with the help of many others too, to fight to keep their land. She was one of 3 delegates that were sent to Washington to speak before the Senate, and in time, she and others helped to form the Northern Plains Resource Council and also other environmental umbrella groups. So now I'd like to invite my dad, Joe Charter, to read a poem that kind of talks about Grandma's life and about that fight also. So we'd like to invite him to read that.
I think everybody likes cowboy poetry, good cowboy poetry. I write the other kind. But when my mother would come to visit me, we'd either listen to the Sons of the Pioneers on the record, or I would recite poetry for her for hours. And that's when you know the true love of a mother, when she'll put up with something like that. This is a poem I wrote for her. Some people called her Annie, others Grandma Ann or Mom. Her children were Kit, Joe, and brother Steve, and don't forget old Tom. Grandchildren were Casey, Bert, and Ressa, Annika, Boyd, and Mike. Great-grandchildren, Tommy, Timber, Taylor, Gavin, Colin, Kenzie, Leon, Merrick, and Old Spike. Well, I just made that name up, Old Spike, so the last verse would rhyme. Although I knew a spike once, but that's for another time. A bit of humor to ease the stress. Mom would have liked that. because she wasn't all or nothing. That's just not where she was. She was uniquely balanced. Not judgmental, not holier than thou, not Anne. And she respected your opinion, and she loved her fellow man. Even when they tested her patience, dumb as a post, it didn't matter, son or daughter, grandchild or friend, she loved that one the most. She could be stern and sometimes angry, but never, ever mean. She was frugal ever since I known her, even before she turned green. I don't mean her complexion, which was in summer a dark, dark tan. I have a picture of her beside an old cedar post, and you can't tell the cedar post from Anne. No, green was the color that describes her stand when men came to take away her home. They came to dig up the land she loved, where her spirit roamed. With Boyd, she picketed herself to the soil, and like a Crow warrior might do, stake to the land, fight to the death. Together they'd count coup. Well, that was how my dad wanted to do it, but calmer heads prevailed. And they joined forces with the neighbors, and what it all entailed was a coalition of different interests coming from the grassroots to fight in a civilized way, of course, those coal mine men with suits. She did not sit with statesmen at Geneva or The Hague. Political intrigue and backbiting just wasn't Mother's bag. No, her forte was more along the lines of loving referee between her children, Kit, Steve, and Tom, and oh yes, there was me. And when it came to her family, she was like a mother hen. She was always there for us, even when we were grown women and men, gathering her chicks under her wings for their protection. She'd take us in for a while and then send us back out in a safe direction. She was a deep well of knowledge and wisdom she acquired over years, and she dispensed it with loving measure to quiet worries, dreads, and fears. She didn't force it on you or say, I told you so, when you didn't listen to that wisdom and you chose and your own way chose to go. So some of you knew her as a protector of this mother of this planet Earth. Others knew her as a Christian who preached the Bible's worth. Environmentalist, rancher, Christian, all fit, but what stands out like no other is the defining quality that matters most to me, that she was my mother.
One of the things that Grandma absolutely loved, and I think the poem kind of brought that out, was the earth. She loved everything about the earth. She loved to sit on the porch at the cabin at night, drinking a glass of iced tea just to watch the sunset. She loved the beautiful rain that would come down, and she was so thankful for that. She said that when she observed these things, it brought her closer to her Creator. It was a chance for her to have an intimate conversation with God. So each year, Grandma would tend to a huge garden. If you've ever been out to the ranch, it was big, and it contained everything imaginable. She would work and work and work to cultivate that garden, even though there wasn't a ton of rain, nurturing every vegetable, taking care of the soil. There are even times when I heard that she actually slept in the garden at night with a shotgun to keep porcupines out. So she's pretty dedicated to her garden, and she was dedicated to the earth. She loved it, and that's why she showed such a passion for what she did, a passion to preserve it. She longed for a time when our treatment as humans of God's gift, that she said that it was, would not be determined by the almighty dollar. She longed for a time when no longer greed and selfishness would reign. And it's interesting to note that her Creator, the God that she worshipped, had that same passion,